I'm ready to announce my conference championship predictions tonight. We have 4 Power 4 conferences now, so it doesn't take quite as long to get around the country, shamefully. But I digress. Let's start in the Big Ten. The Big Ten is adding a number of teams this year. I think 4 of them stand out. I think Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State kind of still need to see the offense there, but Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, you got Penn State there. USC's here. I'm going to talk about them a little bit later tonight because there's a thing that could happen at USC this year that would absolutely insert them into the mainframe conversation of who wins the Big Ten. But Ohio State versus Oregon is my conference championship matchup and prediction. I think that's going to be the most common matchup that people predict. It's the best 2 rosters in the conference. It's the preseason number 1 and number 2 to win the Big Ten. I fully believe Ohio State, if they need to, can ride defense. I don't think they'll need to. Like Will Howard, I don't have him as the top quarterback in the conference. Actually, I have Dylan Gabriel at Oregon as the top quarterback in the conference. But even if he's not, in fact, even if that offensive line lets them down early in the year, I don't think it's going to be some, chronic, like ingrown toenail of a problem on their roster to where they can't win. But if they need to buy themselves some time, they may have the best defense in the country, let alone the Big Ten. So I've got them matching up against Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. Remember, they play in the regular season. Ohio State goes to Eugene in the middle part of the season. So who wins that one? I don't think there's a whole lot of skill in penciling in W's and L's. But however that one shakes out, I've got them rematching in Indy. And in Indianapolis with a conference championship on the line as of today, I've got Ohio State winning the Big Ten. And that would give Ohio State, obviously, a first-round bye in the college football playoff. More on that down the road. And by down the road, I mean like in 20 minutes on this show. Next up, let's travel to the SEC. This is going to be strange, so you got to understand now, this is not just the JP poll. I've got the JP poll coming for you next week, by the way, but it's not just simple as power rating these teams. I've got Georgia power rated as the number 1 team in this conference. I've got Georgia as a top 2 team. Yeah, that sounds suspicious, but that's because it is. I've got Georgia power rated sky high. Excellent portal moves. They get Carson Beck back. Schedule matters here, though. I don't have this massive gap between Georgia and the next 3 or 4 teams in the SEC like some people do. I was at SEC Media Days last week, and the talk around the media water cooler was it's Georgia and everyone else. I don't quite think that's the case, although I do agree that they are the best of the bunch, but they're not so far above and beyond as to make me think they're just going to buzz through at Alabama, at Texas, at Ole Miss, and go unscathed. Now, they don't have to go unscathed to get the conference championship, but if they are scathed, then it could mean that teams like Texas or teams like Alabama or teams like Ole Miss were ones to trip them up, which gives those teams a leg up on them when it comes to the conference standing. So you know who I put in the SEC championship game? I got Ole Miss in the SEC championship game because I hate them so much, and I've got Texas in the SEC championship game. Both are very dependable teams. I think they're both well-rounded. I think Ole Miss defensively will come into form and be as well-rounded a product as we've seen them be under Lane Kiffin. It's a must-win moment this year for them. I think there's pressure, but pressure they can deliver upon over there. I think Ole Miss will be a player-led team this year. A lot of talk about guys like Judkins walking out. Not a whole lot of talk about the Ulysses Bentleys of the world. But he'll be a star in their offense. He'll be a star, and most of you don't even know who that is yet, but you will. Texas versus Ole Miss has a lot to do with how good the teams are and has a lot to do with the fact that they just flat out got more workable schedules, and Georgia's got to come to both of those buildings. And so it's tough, man. There's no team in the country that I'd predict going undefeated with Georgia's schedule, Georgia included. So I got Texas winning the SEC, which I don't need to tell anyone would be a pretty big story. But as of right now, I got Texas winning the SEC. I think they will draw a lot upon what they did last year. Last year, they got a taste, and then they got a taste when they got to the playoff. That means something. They got to replace a lot offensively, quarterback not among them. But I just think the overall profile of the program is such that if they step into a conference, especially if they step in having recruited to it for 3 years before they ever got here, and they click this year, I think they can be in Atlanta, and I think they can win the whole thing. And that would give Texas an SEC championship and a first-round bye and a top 4 seed in the playoff. Still got to get used to saying that. Next up, in the ACC, I saw a viable path for Virginia Tech. I still do. I see a viable path for NC State. Of course, you've got Florida State, you've got Clemson, you've got Miami here. To me, if you're going to call your shot on one of these upset teams, one of these dark horse teams, that's okay. It's really tough to have any skill in doing any of this. It's really, really tough to have skill in knowing which of those somewhat less talented rosters will completely maximize their potential. Because there's a world where Virginia Tech, although they haven't recruited heads up with Miami or Florida State or Clemson, ends up playing for a conference title just because they squeezed every drop out of their sponge this year. But in the absence of being able to predict that, I'm going to go with one of these top 3. Florida State, Clemson, Miami are 1, 2, 3 right now. I think it's going to be a rematch of a regular season game, and I think that rematch is actually going to be the rematch that people feared when they first formed this version of the ACC. Finally, after it feels like dozens of years, how about Florida State versus Miami for the ACC championship? They play in the regular season. I got them playing again in Charlotte for the conference crown. I trust the entire organization at Florida State. So it doesn't even matter to me so much that maybe DJ is not quite Jordan Travis. And it may not matter to me so much that there is a lot of little question marks where there used to be proven production offensively there. I just trust that they'll fill it. I'll trust that in the aggregate, they'll Billy Bean it, man. They'll find a way, and they'll put together a very, very solid playoff contending type team. I think Cam Ward's going to be a breakout star at Miami. I think in year 3 under Cristobal, where you've gone 5-7 to 7-5, 7-6, if you count the bowl game, it's natural that they take that leap this year. And I think that also that game against Virginia Tech they have week 5 is a big one. Not being talked about a lot right now. That's a Friday night game. That's a big one. Right now, with Florida State, Miami in the ACC championship game, I'd lean Florida State to win it. And that would mean Florida State has a conference championship, has a first-round bye, and has a top 4 seed. There's also a lot to be said for what happened to them last year. And if what happened to them last year has any carryover effect, I think the carryover effect would be having the collective organizational attitude of not leaving a doubt. You don't let it rest in a committee member's hands. You salt the earth, you leave no doubt in anyone's mind, and then even if they don't like you, even if they got an axe to grind, you win that conference championship, they got to put you in. And they got to put you in one of those top 4 spots. That's the ACC. The odds right now are Florida State, Clemson, Miami 1, 2, 3. I'm going to take number 1 versus number 3, at least according to FanDuel odds. And in the Big 12, I had to get a new piece of paper, actually. Because in the Big 12, I had 7 different matchup combinations in 1 hour to play for the Big 12 championship game. 9 teams in this conference right now, according to FanDuel, have plus 1,600 or better odds to win it. So, to say the least, I could be talked off of this. But at the same time, I want to very counterintuitively say I am steadfast in this prediction. Someone's lying, and there's only one person in the room here, so paper pop. Oklahoma State versus Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game. As my own production team scoffs in my ear, in a few months I'll be accepting multiple apologies in this building. The run game for Oklahoma State is enough for them to ride to a conference championship, I think. You got about 1 million returning starts on the offensive line. You've got the best running back in the country in Ollie Gordon. You've got a lot of dependability there. If Alan Bowman, and I hope he's listening with both fingers crossed, if Alan Bowman can just cut down on the turnovers for me, you've got the experience, okay? You've been there. You've seen the conference. You've got a favorable schedule. Utah has to come to you early in the season, and that's week 4. And then after that, you go to Kansas State. That's Oklahoma State's season right there. Week 4, week 5, or week 5, week 6. Yeah, week 4, week 5. Not that I discount West Virginia, because that's one of our sleeper games of the year, Oklahoma State, West Virginia in week 4, 5, 6. I think that's their season. And I think that they'll actually be able to go toe-to-toe physically with those teams. I said that once upon a time before and ended up not being right about it 2 years ago. So I hope I'm right here. I got Oklahoma State and I've got Iowa State. Iowa State, it's just one of those build towards years for them. Quarterback, check. Love what they are at running back. Love for Iowa State what they are at wide receiver. And so it's a top 10 returning production team. The over-under win total is 7.5 there, which is really high for Iowa State. It's not high for Alabama. It's high for Iowa State. They have to peak late. Their season, this is the kind of team that could start off 2, 4, 6, 8-0, but their last 4 games include at Kansas, at Utah, and Kansas State. So it's going to be one thing. It's going to be like 2 seasons for Iowa State. One of them is getting to November, and then the other one's getting through November. Well, my thinking here is if Iowa State's there, of course no bias is baked into this prediction. If Iowa State's there, it's probably because they beat one or both of Utah and Kansas State to get there, and therefore that's how they make it in, and that's how you have the suspicious absence of Utah and Kansas State. Oklahoma State, though, is actually the team I would take to win it because I think Oklahoma State profiles pretty well in that kind of setting. And they got there last year, and last year, man, think about how different that ending of the season could have gone. You had a weird game where Oklahoma State had to go to Brigham Young, and they ended up coming from behind and winning the thing. Therefore, they go and get their brains beat in by Texas. Had they lost that game, it was going to be Texas versus Oklahoma, part 2 in Dallas. And I don't know that Texas wouldn't have still won the thing, but it would have been a little different feel, I guess. So I got Oklahoma State in the Big 12 right now. I've got FSU in the ACC. I have got Texas in the SEC. And I've got Ohio State in the Big 10. What order would those teams be in? Don't know yet. We will in a few minutes. But those would be your top 4 seeds. Those would be the teams with first-round byes. How does anyone feel about that? How do Ole Miss fans feel? How do Oregon fans feel that they don't get a first-round bye, but Oklahoma State does? Well, don't talk to me. Talk to the folks who love the concept of auto bids.